Hello again. I'm your host, Nick Jackson, and this is another episode of the Slow Lore series. This episode is a conversation I had with Dr. Rulon Clark, a behavioral ecologist, evolutionary biologist, and a professor at San Diego State University. Although he isn't a slow loris expert, in fact, you'll hear us begin the conversation talking about his current work with rattlesnakes and kangaroo rats. I thought this conversation was important to include in the series because we get into an important question about conservation, about what humans evolved to be, and maybe more importantly, about what humans could become. So, here it is, my conversation with Dr. Rulon Clark. Introduce yourself for me?
Yeah, my name's Rulon Clark. I'm a faculty member in Department of Biology at San Diego State University.
Can you talk about how you got introduced to the life sciences?
Yeah. So I was lucky. I had a friend growing up whose father worked at a natural history museum. So even in junior high school and high school, I knew, unlike most kids, I knew early on that there was this viable career path of studying wildlife, of studying animals. He was a herpetologist, not coincidentally, which is what my primary expertise is now. He would take us on collecting expeditions to southern Utah, where we collect lizards and snakes and stuff and small mammals. And so when I went to college, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I just never really deviated from that. I always knew I wanted to be some sort of a professional herpetologist of some type, and the academic path for that was very clear to me even while I was still in high school.
Wow, that is pretty special and rare that you find your thing so young. Can you talk about your kind of specific field of research now?
Yeah, so I'm a behavioral ecologist. I kind of look at animals from the perspective of kind of individuals and their behavior and their lives in nature. And that also makes me an evolutionary biologist because, everything in biology has to be viewed through the lens of evolutionary biology. In particular, behavior. Animals have been shaped by evolution to behave in ways that maximize their reproductive success. So when I study behavior, I'm really studying evolution. And so a lot of the questions that we ask in my lab have to do with foraging behavior and kind of predator-prey interactions, primarily between snakes and small mammals, as well as some other kind of pairs of predators and prey. It's just something that, I have kind of developed an ongoing interest in, and I keep building on studies that we've done of these really interesting predator-prey dynamics between the two parties.
Can you talk about some of your findings? Take me from the beginning of an experiment to, some kind of conclusion.
Well, I mean, the easiest thing is just talk about the stuff that we're doing now, because that's the stuff that's, foremost on my mind. So some of our current research is on kangaroo rats, very common small mammals, carnivorous small mammals that live in desert regions of the Southwest U.S., and rattlesnakes. So rattlesnakes are by and large small mammal predators. And there are a couple of species of rattlesnakes that are able to specialize on kangaroo rats, and they incorporate them as kind of the bulk of their diet. Other species of rattlesnakes do not seem to be able to eat and consume kangaroo rats, at least not as readily. We became interested in why because of these other field studies we were doing. In particular, we were working in the Mojave Desert on the population of sidewinder rattlesnakes and studying other aspects of their foraging ecology. And we found that they were completely ineffective at being able to strike kangaroo rats. Like when they launch their very fast predatory strike, all rattlesnakes have that same approach to killing things. They'll sit and wait in ambush for something to come close enough that they can leap out at it.
So when you said they couldn't eat them, they couldn't catch them.
They were missing, yeah.
Okay.
So when we couldn't, the movements of both animals are so fast, we couldn't tell. We were recording it with these video cameras. Your standard video camera records at 30 frames per second. At that speed, each frame is just a blur for the parts of both animals. You can't see what's going on. When we got a slightly higher frame rate camera to get it at 120 frames per second, we got a better idea of what was going on, but we needed that kind of launched us on this path of we need to be able to look closer. That's often what we're doing in field studies, is just trying to look in detail at what the animals are doing in nature. So I'm collaborating with Tim Hyam. He's a biomechanics professor at University of California, Riverside. His laboratory has, very sophisticated high-speed video equipment that we've taken out into the wild. And now we can see in detail how fast and kind of powerful the movements of the kangaroo rats are in the few microseconds they have when the snake launches itself at the rat. It actually makes this kind of low frequency burst of sound. The kangaroo rats have incredible sound. They're a lot of kind of brain space dedicated to sound, so extremely sensitive hearing. They can pick up on that and organize this evasive jump. They're able to avoid most rattlesnake strikes by doing that. The Mojave rattlesnakes, a different species of rattlesnake than the one we were initially studying, somehow overcome that defense, and we're not sure how they're doing it, because we know they eat kangaroo rats in large numbers of them. So we're kind of looking at both from the mammal perspective and the snake perspective, kind of environmental and ecological constraints on the speed of their movements and kind of the relative timing of their movements to figure out what happens when one party or the other is successful. What are they doing that allows them to either kill and envenomate a rat or avoid the snake that's leaping at it from ambush?
Right before we started, I was kind of talking about how the unimaginable length of time that species have taken to evolve.
Yeah.
If there's two kinds of snakes, one has evolved to catch the mouse, the other hasn't. Do we have any idea when that would have happened?
So off the top of my head, no, but I could actually probably make a pretty good guess. There are evolutionary biologists who are reconstructing kind of the phylogenetic history of both snakes and rats. We know that rattlesnakes were a group that evolved in North America some millions of years ago. Again, I'd have to go to the literature to put some precise numbers on this, but they diversified within, probably originating somewhere in the highlands of Mexico, diversified throughout North America. One species gets down to South America. We have an idea of when kangaroo rats also may have diversified across the same kind of arid landscape that both parties kind of occupy. So the two clades as a whole, the kangaroo rat group and the rattlesnake group, we could probably reconstruct, when they evolved into kind of the forms they occupy and the habitats they occupy now, and put some numbers on that. When you get specific, like within this particular species or these populations, it gets a little fuzzier. But certainly for millions of years, they've been, they're both kind of dominant species within their ecosystems. The kangaroo rats are extremely important kind of keystone animals for the desert ecosystems because they're so successful and abundant. They create these big kind of burrows that lots of other animals use as like a thermal refuge. They disperse seeds all over. They're, eating seeds from all sorts of different, vegetation in the desert. And then the rattlesnakes are probably the most common vertebrate predator that you're going to encounter in most desert regions in the United States. They can reach like incredibly high population densities because they're low energy specialists. They don't actually need to eat that often to, grow and reproduce. And so in undisturbed habitats, there can be many, many rattlesnakes out there hunting.
Do you also study the effects of humans and how they affect and disrupt the animal's evolution?
Yeah, and another kind of arm of my laboratory is more kind of conservation ecology, where we look at the various effects that humans are having on wildlife populations, and we use genetic tools a lot to kind of understand the diversity of populations and how fragmentation by roads or other human developments might be affecting connectivity and diversity in wildlife populations. I don't think you could study animals without taking into consideration anthropogenic influences. I mean, it's global, right? Wherever you are, you have to be cognizant of the fact the systems you study may have been thrown out of equilibrium within the last several hundred years by all the things that humans are doing.
One of the questions, and we had talked about right before this, why do we want to keep animal species around? It sounds like a really simple answer.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because I'm trying to parse out all the different arguments for?
Well, you could answer that on a bunch of different levels, right? Like you could answer it from kind of a very practical level, whereas we view kind of the natural world as this thing that supports us, right? Like we all recognize that humans are just another species. We're part of the world, right? Like we have our own evolutionary history, and we still rely in large extent on resources that we get from the natural world. So when that world is thrown out of balance or out of equilibrium, that has all sorts of implications for our own kind of resource use and future and prosperity, etc. You could answer that from a kind of a moral or philosophical perspective on, as far as we know, we might be unique in being a species that has this awareness about our impact and what is happening because of our own kind of needs. Does that mean we have an imperative to protect the other species that we coexist with? I don't have a good answer for that, but you could see how people from kind of this philosophical perspective might think that would be true, that because we are aware of what we're doing and why it might be bad, if we can ascribe some sort of inherent value to other species, we should try to protect them. Those are both good answers and good ways to approach it, I think.
Yeah, for me, I guess when I really try to investigate and interrogate it in myself, it's more the latter. It's almost like a religious belief I have. Like you said, we know better. It's really an interesting thing. But
well, we understand death and we understand extinction. I'm not sure any other animals do. Certainly not to the same extent that we are. I think there's very clear evidence that the ability that we have to use language, we've evolved this language ability that certainly has lots of precursors in other species, and lots of other species have communication ability, but nothing like kind of this symbolic language that we've evolved that gives us an ability to travel in space and time mentally that I think is absent in other animals. So I think, I can say to you, my sister saw your brother under the tree yesterday. And there's this complex, you immediately understand and can project, back in time and in space to some other place with people who aren't here. Like that's a complicated set of variables that you immediately can pick up because we've kind of co-evolved this language ability. And I think that ability endows us as a species. Again, a lot of our knowledge is not like I only know a certain amount of things myself, but I know we as humans know a ton of things, that our collective knowledge is this important kind of weight that our species kind of carries around. And I do think it comes with this responsibility.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, because I've just been playing kind of devil's advocate and interrogating this myself, and it's kind of funny to think, well, we have evolved to become as advanced as we have.
Right.
We've kind of evolved to be able to create oil tankers and the tools for destruction. And it's kind of interesting to think that in a way it's kind of limiting us, that no other animal would ever.
Right. Well, there's like these almost warring aspects of our nature, right? Like from the perspective of evolutionary biology and resource use, there is absolutely no reason why you would expect us or any other animal to ever evolve some sort of set of behaviors or some sort of conditions that would allow them to limit their resource use for the common good. That is not what natural selection does. Natural selection is a very selfish optimizing process, and it's very specific. It is optimized behaviors in individuals that lead to their own reproductive success. And so it's not surprising at all that for the most part humans are like other animals, and that we are interested in the things that benefit us and our close kin in the short term. But at the same time, there's this interesting aspect of natural selection and behavior in social animals under some conditions can evolve kind of cooperative behaviors as well. At an ultimate level, it's because those cooperative behaviors still benefit them. But at an approximate level, it means that we might have kind of these cognitive behaviors in place that allow us to be that had given us the space for developing empathy and this time travel, this language ability to think about other individuals outside ourselves. As social animals, I think it was beneficial for us to be able to picture the world from the perspective of other humans and other animals. And now that we can do that, it's like we've unlocked this door and have moved to the space where maybe no other species has moved to before. And we're wrestling with the implications of that. So the root of that, I think, is still rooted in kind of this inherent natural selection selfishness. But now that we have it, we understand what natural selection is and how it came about. And, maximizing genetic reproductive success was this ultimate imperative. But we can divorce ourselves from that now, right? There's no reason that now that we understand it, I can tell my genes to go jump in a lake and behave in ways that have nothing to do with genetic reproductive success, because we as humans have the ability to picture the world in different ways and to choose kind of other paths or other reasons for behaving in the way that we do.
The last thing, before I take too much of your time, I posed this one hypothesis. I told you that I think animals are more special than the public realizes. I'd assume as a biologist, you're so intimate with wildlife. I was hoping you could maybe speak to your frustration in that disconnect between, there's a ton of examples of this, right. I guess, the differences between what somebody in the sciences know and what the public quote unquote know.
Sure.
And then also maybe the second part is, can you speak to what you think scientists' duty is maybe to teach the public?
I guess in terms of the first part, I agree with you that there's, this fascinating world of animals and plants and other organisms that, we're just scratching the surface of in a lot of areas. And there's, just questions after questions after questions of things that we don't know that are, there's like this infinite number of interesting kind of questions about the natural world that we can keep asking. And that's great, but it's also daunting because, you have to somehow focus on the questions that you think are particularly relevant or important or can, broad to the public and to other scientists. And so there's a constant kind of decisions that we have to make about, well, there's lots of things we don't know about these species. What are the things we should ask now? We all have a limited amount of time and resources to do these studies. But then the other part of it, that there's all this, the things we learn and that we think the public should be aware of. I guess this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about, that this responsibility that people have. Another way to think of this is that people won't care if they don't know. Like you can't get people to care about something if they don't understand it. We're only going to really care and try to protect the things that we really love. And you have to understand something in order to love it, right? Like I have to get into the details on the animals I study for me to really start to care deeply about them. And so by getting other people to care and to understand, I think that just furthers the overall mission of getting people to be willing to make sacrifices and somehow change or curtail our resource use in such a way that helps us prevent these ongoing destructive impacts that we're having on wildlife populations. In a geological sense, we're living at this time where there's a meteor impact going off right now. It's kind of a slow motion one, but it's very analogous to these massive extinction events that we've seen in the past. We're seeing the same rates of animals being lost as during those times when we know these catastrophic things happen in the world. This is one that we've suddenly become aware of and that we could potentially stop or at least lessen the impact of this meteor, if you will. It just requires the will right? We know what we're doing now and what's causing these problems. We just have to convince each other enough to change it. And that's not easy. But I think, it would be a moral failing to not try. And so from my perspective, anything I can do to reach out to people and try to convince them of kind of the value and the beauty and the importance of the natural world, and trying to maintain some semblance of the equilibrium state that we're in would be great. And it's for our benefit and the benefit of our children. The world has lived through asteroid impacts in the past, and it will again in the future. I mean, evolution will continue to produce various forms of life after we're gone. All species go extinct eventually, and they're replaced by species that evolve after them. But that doesn't mean that we want us and our children to have to suffer through this impact, right? Like, I think we could try to do better to soften that blow as much as possible.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure.
I am Nick Jackson, and that was my conversation with Dr. Rulon Clark. Thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.